Hey folks, and welcome to this new video. If you're active on social media, you may have mentioned that there are some people are having issues with the FETtec 45 amp ESC in combination with some motors at the moment. That is the reason for this video. I want to show you how to solve the problem, what is causing the problem, and give you some tips on how to build an even better flying quad. The problem only occurs on newer, powerful and lightweight motors. Since the firmware version 155 solved the problem for my quad, we can say it's a communication problem between the ESCs and the motors. The demagnetization phase of the motors was too long, which caused the ESC to do these hiccups. After we tested the 155 firmware with some test pilots, I can say it's able to solve the problem. Of course, you can still contact me if you have any problems and we can try to solve the problem for you. But the demagnetization problem is solved with the 155 firmware. There will be a new FC firmware soon, which solves some wobble problems which can occur if you do sharp movements. I've been testing the firmware at the moment, and in my testings there was no wobble and no twitches with stock settings. At the moment there is nothing more to say about this. But here are 10 tips which I personally noticed make my quad fly even better and cleaner. The first and perhaps easiest tip from my side is to mount your FC hard. I fly a lot and I always have my FC and my ESC mounted hard.
I use steel screws and even steel nuts to mount the whole stack. Also my ESC is mounted hard and the bolt holes are not filed out. By the way, if you do the filing wrong and file out too much, you can kill your ESC. If you have been told that soft mounting the FC is the better way to go, that is not wrong. If you want to do a lot of tuning to get maybe 1% more performance out of your quad, you can also choose the soft mount method, but keep in mind that it's a lot of work. If you just want a perfect flying quad fast and without a lot of tuning, it's better to go for the hard mount method. I would say that 99% of users should use the hard mount method.
My second tip is perhaps a bit harder. Learn how to solder. I have seen so many builds in the last few weeks and months and so many bad solderings.
You would not drive a car with a loose engine either, would you? So do not fly a quad with a bad soldering job. You would not believe how many problems can be solved with a good solder joint. And you would not believe how many problems a bad solder job can cause. There are solder and practice boards on the market, buy them and use them. Avoid cold solder joints and use flux. Flux makes soldering so easy, so do not go the hard way when there is an easier one. If you want to be 100% sure there are no soldering bubbles on your electronics, be sure to use tape to cover the components on the ESC, as you can see on the picture right here.
Of course there are reasons for new firmwares, new things, updates, bug fixes and so on. One way to avoid problems is to always update your ESC and FC to the latest firmware before you put it in your quad.
Don't get me wrong. If you know your gear and what firmware works best for you, you can go with it. No one is going to force you to update a quad that flies perfectly. But for beginners, new quads with new parts, and maybe even quads that are causing problems, always go with the latest firmware available.
Another very simple tip, and in my eyes the solution to many problems, use the Onewire protocol. Yes, I know, some people say D-Shot 2400 is still so much better.
And yes, D-Shot 2400 is still a bit faster, but keep in mind that Onewire is as fast as D-Shot 600. That is a difference of about 20 microseconds. In reality, it's not possible to feel this. Maybe D-Shot 2400 is still a bit more aggressive in some situations, but Onewire is the better choice and will be the basis for developments in the future.
This is a tip I can always give you. Do not build a quad and just put on PIDs you have seen work well for another pilot. Of course it's possible that it will work.
But your quad will not be exactly the same as the pilot's quad. Even if you build it exactly the same with exactly the same parts, there will be differences. Cable, weight or even noise caused by the VTX or RX are never the same. Try tuning a quad by yourself.
This is so simple and so necessary. After soldering, use alcohol and an old toothbrush to clean your electronics.
This will help make your electronics last longer, and you will rid your electronics of small solder balls that can cause a short and damage your FC and especially your ESC. Sometimes you cannot see small solder balls with your eyes. Flux is great for soldering, but not for your electronics. It should be cleaned up after soldering.
Okay, maybe soldering is part of it. But it is necessary to build your quad as clean as possible. That also means you need to know how to run your wires.
You need to make sure the wiring harness does not touch the motor wires and so on. This is necessary to avoid interference caused by the electronics. The noisiest part of a quad are often the RX and the VTX. These should be wired neatly. One thing I have mentioned so many times now is screws that are too long for the motors. You can kill your motors with screws that are too long, and even your ESC. You can easily avoid damage by buying a cheap multimeter with continuous check. You can also use it to check if a motor screw is touching the windings. Just use the continuous check to measure your frame and the motor phases. Note that most carbon frames are coated, so the easiest way to do this is to measure the side of the frame.
Another really necessary thing is use the capacitor the ESC comes with. Many problems can be solved just by using the capacitor. The even better way to protect your electronics is to use the FETtec spike absorber.
In crashs or even when plugging in the quad, the spike absorber will keep voltage spikes away from your ESC and FC. In case you do not know, 6S, which equals 22.2 volts, can cause up spikes up to 50 volts in tough situations. And 50 volt is of course enough to kill your FC or your ESC. That's what the spike absorber is made for. I have not killed a FC or ESC in a crash since I started using this little diamond.
I know there are a lot of people out there wondering how they can get into this hobby easily and, more important, cheaply.
That's perfectly fine. I can understand that they do not want to spend thousands to start a hobby that they do not actually know if they would continue after trying. However, do not save money in the wrong places so you will buy twice or break other things. Things you should not buy cheaply include soldering irons. A good soldering iron makes soldering so much easier. That is because they are able to generate the heat that you need and hold it as well. It's the same with solder. Do not buy cheap solder, and please do not use soldering grease. It's not made for electronics. It can damage the traces because it's so aggressive.
Always, and I mean always, check your electronics before building your quad. Use USB to check your FC.
Check to see if it works well with the GUI. Testing the ESC is a little bit trickier, but also not so much. If you have one, use a lab power supply with alligator clips to check if the ESC works fine. If you don't have a lab power supply, just solder on the XT60 and use a smoke stopper to check if it's okay. Maybe use some thinner wires to do this, because you only need a little solder. If you do this and you have a problem, it's easier to get a replacement because the support will easier understand. The FETtec quality control is very good, but of course there may be errors or the electronics may be damaged during shipping.
So for me, these tips are necessary. I can tell you I've been following these tips since I started this hobby, and I've never had any major issues. To date I've only been able to kill one 4-in-1 ESC, and that was my fault. If you always keep these tips in mind, you'll be able to build cleaner and even better flying quads. And a few of these tips may also help you even if you don't fly with FETtec electronics. Thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great day and enjoy your flying. See you next time.